It's Tuesday, Penn State fans, and that means it's time for the BWI Daily Recruiting Show. I'm Greg Pickel. Ryan Snyder is here with me as well. T. Frank's pushing all the buttons to make sure it looks and sounds as you would all like it to. And Ryan, it's a special Tuesday because we not only have a transfer portal commitment to talk about that happened just a few hours ago, but also a high school commitment that happened at the end of last week. And we have some top groups to get to as well. So we'll open the bidding, I think, with the transfer portal. Penn State picking up Demeioun Robinson from Maryland on Tuesday morning. This is a player who went into the transfer portal about 15 days ago as we sit here and talk on April 12th. And the Lions made quick work of getting him in the class. Ryan, I guess let me start with this. Your just first impressions of the pursuit Penn State put on to make this happen, and then your reaction to how quickly it all got done.
Well, he was certainly someone that they coveted when he was coming out of high school, right? And he was part of that 2021 class that just had their entire recruitment screwed up because of COVID. I was going back and looking at his visits today, and I knew he was limited, but I really, researching it again, realized how much he was limited. He at the time, I remember he was talking a lot about wanting to see some SEC schools and getting out to, I think, some Texas schools, and none of that was able to happen. Obviously because of COVID. So it made sense, right, that he commits to the in-state school and Mike Locksley. Mike Locksley, of course, was just hired. What was it, 4 months prior? I think he committed to
Yep,
them in March 2020, I believe is what it was. So.
that's right.
Uh, what happened there, I'm not exactly sure. I was looking at PFF numbers. He scored kind of in the mid 60s, so an average season for a freshman. I honestly think that's not too bad, for a freshman. Looked like he had solid contributions from that level. But this was a player that really just fits what Penn State wants, man. They need a real true edge rusher. Akeem Mesidor isn't a true edge rusher. I think Akeem wants to be a true defensive end. But even when you watch his film for West Virginia, he certainly fits the interior better, especially with his size. I mean, we have. I was able to get some updated numbers on Demeioun Robinson. He is up to 240 now, so size wise, he's putting up some good size. And but I think just from his length perspective and what he has is from a skill perspective, it really fits what exactly Penn State needs. So I see someone that's going to come in here and be expected at least to contribute immediately. Whether that happens or not, only time will tell. But the fact that he got on the field pretty early for Maryland and his pedigree as a player, you would think that this is going to bode out pretty well for Penn State.
I want to look back at two James Franklin quotes, Ryan. The first one coming last December, and I think it was our David Eckert who may have asked. He certainly wrote about it. But where was Penn State at from the transfer portal perspective or the second signing day perspective? And James Franklin said that between the two, they were hoping to add a receiver, help along the defensive line, help along the offensive line, linebacker, maybe even safety. They've checked a couple of those boxes already with Hunter Norzad, of course, the offensive lineman from Cornell, Mitchell Tinsley, the receiver from Western Kentucky, who's already on campus, and now the addition of Robinson today. And it was interesting. The second quote then is James Franklin saying just last week that they need to add an edge rusher. And look, I'm not going to sit here and suggest that was a big moment for Penn State in this recruitment, but certainly if he wants to rush the quarterback, Penn State has a need for that. James Franklin was as blunt as he's maybe ever been about that. So certainly, when you look at the portal, and I know fans get frustrated with how long it can take to find guys and the obvious needs that are out there and why isn't this or that or the other thing being done. But I think that it's all about patience, right? It's all about finding the right fit, both for the player and for the school. And that can often take much longer than expected. So I guess let's just move on to your thoughts on why this fit makes sense. You've hit on it a little bit, but I think there's also some past relationships there that play a role as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've pretty much hit on it. It's just this is a highly coveted player. Penn State has a good relationship with Quincy Orchard. I think Penn State, if they would have got him on campus more, not had that whole year ruined, would have probably been more of a player. But I also kind of feel like just from remembering his recruitment, that the SEC schools were very heavy on him, and if things didn't change as far as visits were concerned, that they probably would have had a bigger hand in this recruitment as well. So, but I mean, look, I mean, this is just somebody Penn State's wanted. I can just hit on that 1,000 times. The one thing I would really like to know personally is just what other schools are after him, because that's something that we really just struggle to try and figure out if the player is not after him. I mean, there was talk of Auburn being interested in USC, which isn't a surprise, right? Because those two schools have been interested in a bunch of defensive ends and really just the portal in general. And then of course Tennessee was another school, so who was mentioned. So that's just one thing I'm personally curious about, and I'd like to learn more about. But this is just a player that Penn State's coveted for a long time. They had to wait an extra 2 years or so to get him, but he's going to be expected to come in and play right away. And obviously, Disa Isaac, Nick Burton, a couple other guys are going to be expected to contribute as well. But I wouldn't be shocked at all if Demeioun Robinson's starting against Purdue.
Well, we will see soon enough. He'll arrive on campus a little bit later this year. Same with Hunter Norzad, of course. And we'll have to see what else Penn State may have up its sleeve when it comes to the portal. But I think we can safely say that they are not done looking for guys yet. And as spring practices come to an end, you're going to see guys jump into the portal, both almost certainly at Penn State and also across the country. So time will tell there. We'll keep you updated at bluewhiteillustrated.com. But let's move on to the high school commitment that Penn State landed last week, Ryan, Friday. I believe it was mid-evening, early evening. They pick up Marcus Stokes, a quarterback out of Florida, who Mike Yursich, going back and reading some of what you had done, talked about with him in interviews and things like that, and looking at kind of his path to a decision. Mike Yursich certainly made a decision to make him a priority, it felt like, and Penn State gets the job done there. He's an on-3 consensus 3-star, the first quarterback commit in this class. And to me, I feel like he's a guy, just reading what Charles Power, the On3 national scouting director, hope you got your title right, Charles, I think that's it, had to say, this guy seems to be somebody who may be in store for a move up the rankings at some point down the road if he continues progressing the way he has so far.
Yeah, Mike Yurcich fell in love with Marcus Stokes, really, watching him at that national combine. And, for the longest time, I thought it was going to be Jaden Rashada. And really just kind of feels like to me that Marcus Stokes just kind of beat out
Mhm.
Rashada, I guess, on Penn State's board. I mean, or at least in the eyes of Yurcich for sure. So, um, very off the cuff kind of player, which is interesting to me because he's very different from Drew Aller. And one thing that I kind of was getting the vibe with for the longest time was that Penn State wanted more of a passer, less of a runner. And Marcus Stokes, I'm not saying he's a runner. I mean, he definitely sits back, and I think he's going to prefer to throw the ball more often than not. But he definitely brings a different level of athleticism compared to Aller. Now, maybe Aller is just too special of a prospect as far as arm strength and all that you just can't pass up. Of course, you can't pass up on a Drew Aller, but they're very different kind of players. But yeah, this was a case where, man, Yurcich literally reached out to him before he left San Antonio, for that combine. That video, of course, is available to all of these coaches out there. Yurcich was on top of it right away. Of course, there was a lot of Twitter hype about Marcus's performance at that national combine, and he was down in Florida within a week. And Florida, you're allowed to do pretty much anything down there as far as practicing. They do 7-on-7s in Florida before school. So, we're talking like 6:30, 7 a.m. Yurcich was down there for that. Because those practices are just, naturally happening, he's allowed to watch it. Stokes performed great, and really, from my conversation with his coach, which I'll have out probably on Wednesday, he really just kind of made it clear that Yurcich fell in love with him right after that. Seeing him up close for the first time, and one thing I'll give Yurcich and Penn State a lot of credit for is, they're never a school who is curious about whether program X or program Y or program Z has already offered that player. They don't care if you have an offer from some Division I AA or Alabama. If they think if you're a top player, they're going to go after you. And Marcus Stokes is just a perfect example of that. So, getting him up for his second visit was massive. They won him over. I think they kind of won him over before that second visit, honestly. The way he talked to me, he was pretty much had his mind made up before he got here. And he makes that move. So, well, let's see how time goes. I will be curious to see if some of those Florida schools come calling, but he's saying all the right things right now as far as that's not going to matter. And I think the way Yurcich has approached this recruitment, there's no doubt as far as from a relationship perspective, who's in the best position, and that's Penn State.
Yeah, there's no question. The Florida schools have not come calling yet, but it somewhat feels to me a little like Drew Aller in the sense that Penn State and Mike Yursich and James Franklin and his staff put so much work in on the front end that even when Ohio State came calling for Drew Aller, it was not something that, at least from what he said publicly, was really anything he was going to consider in terms of a flip from Penn State to anywhere else. So certainly the quotes that Marcus Stokes has given to you has indicated that that might be the same thing. I might be getting a little bit over my skis with that, but certainly you get the sense that Penn State has done the early legwork here necessary. I want to just go back back to one quick thing you mentioned here, and it's the National Combine. For those that aren't aware, it's run in conjunction with the All-American Bowl.
All-American
Is
Bowl.
that right? How often, you've been doing this a long time. I mean, how often are coaches waiting to jump on that film and getting into contact with guys? Obviously, look, it's different today than it was 10 years ago or even probably 5 years ago with social media and the way you can upload video quickly and everything else. But, is that a rare occurrence for you? And what do you think it says about the way Mike Yurcich goes about recruiting guys?
Yeah, I haven't, obviously I focus on Penn State, right? I don't focus on all these other schools. So I can't think of too many instances where that was the case with Penn State. I'm sure it has been in the past, and I just wasn't able to connect the dots for one reason or another. Uh, but I would say this, like, for a quarterback and you're really able to throw in a setting where you're throwing against good DBs, you have good wide receivers. Like, I think that position, you can put more stock into a combine like that,
Sure.
compared to, a number of other positions. So from that perspective, I think that does make sense. And of course, we knew Penn State was searching hard for a quarterback at the time, because it was already clear to me, at least, that in late December, that Penn State was fading with Dante Moore. That likely wasn't going to happen. And I come to learn that Penn State kind of already had moved on from Rashad at the time. So,
Right.
yeah, I mean, it just made sense. He needed to search for somebody. This guy was getting a ton of hype right out of that combine. And, of course, I'm pretty confident in saying he already was watching Stokes a little bit leading into that. I mean, he had to have known about him a little bit. But then after seeing that, going down and seeing him in person, there was no doubt who became, in my opinion, Yurchich's top target, which was Marcus. So I think that's fairly rare. I don't think that's like dozens of guys are having that kind of a quick spin with their recruitment, but it makes more sense at quarterback than any other position, I would think.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And for Penn State, it's up to 9 commitments now in the class of 2023. Still one of the top groups in the Big Ten and in the country. And we'll see where they go from here. There's a couple other guys we're going to hit on that would only swell where that class is ranked a little bit later in the BWI Daily Recruiting Show. But just to wrap things up with Stokes here, quarterbacks can often be the leader of a class and kind of the glue guys. And we've seen that in the past where they are maybe some of your best recruiters, but it's not always that way. Some guys just aren't, into that sort of thing. Did you get any impression about what kind of path Stokes might take in that regard?
Well, I'm sure he'll be very active on social media. I'm sure he'll be very active in texting and all that stuff. But he lives in Nice, or what is that, outside of Jacksonville, right? So where'd Christian Veilleux? He was in Maryland and Canada, right?
Right.
It was easy to get to Penn State. Drew Aller's in Ohio. Bo Buell is from York. I mean, the way you actively recruit is obviously through messaging and all that stuff. But you got to
Right.
meet guys on campus too. And I'm sure Stokes will get up here a couple times before the season starts. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, for example, the Lash Bash, for example, that would make a lot of sense. And maybe even for a camp as well. But it's going to be harder for him to do that when he's not meeting guys in person. Because that's really, man, that's where it counts. I mean, yes, these text messages are fun. Guys, I'm sure, play PlayStation together and things like that. But, really hanging out with a guy on campus for a day, spending 8 hours with a specific player and a bunch of coaches, like, that's where those relationships are really formed. And from that perspective, being down in Florida, it's certainly going to be harder to do than, for example, what Aller or Brewer or any of the recent guys have done.
It's the Blue White Illustrated BWI Daily Recruiting Show. He's Ryan Snyder. I'm Greg Pickel. We're rolling along here through 2 commitments to 2 uncommitted players. We're going to open things up with Demeioun Lyons, a player that Penn State has been pursuing for quite some time and has hosted numerous times in the class of 2023. Ryan, he has his top schools list out, or at least one of them. We'll see how many more he ends up with before he commits. But
Mhm.
what can you walk us through about where he stands right now?
Yeah, I mean, he's planning to make an announcement August 4th. That was the big news this week. He put his top schools out a handful of weeks ago. I think we covered it a little bit, but this is Penn State's player to lose. And I don't see anything changing that as long as Penn State still is going to go all out for him. I've talked in the past that I know he had to improve some things academically, and, good on Jamil, because everything I've heard is that he's really taken a different step with that, or another level, excuse me, over his junior year. And that's great to hear, man, because he's an awesome player. A really good kid too, man. Every time I talk to Jamil, I'm more and more impressed with just his demeanor and, quiet, confident guy, but just well-spoken. And I really enjoyed getting to know him the more I talk to him. So I'm happy that he's really made those strides, because at one point, I was worried that may hurt him with a school like Penn State, which, it's not Notre Dame or Vanderbilt or Stanford, but it is harder to get into Penn State than some other schools. So all signs point to Penn State. He was just back up here this past week. great visit. That was one of his first visits too, where he's really able to spend time with the staff. His previous ones for a mixture of camps or games or whatever, and those visits are all good. But I talk about this all the time, spending 5, 6, 7 hours with the coaching staff, watching film, watching practice, just kicking it is so important. So those visits, especially in the spring, this time of year when you get to watch practice, are so important. So I don't see. It's hard for me to see Lions going anywhere else. And of course, I'm running my mouth on YouTube now, so I will probably end up somewhere else. My luck, but I think all signs point to Penn State here. He did go to Pitt this past weekend. He's been to West Virginia before, and he does have some official visits coming up. So I plan on we'll report on that here in a couple days, probably tomorrow. Actually, I'll write that up. But I had a good talk with Demeioun Monday night, so I was planning to actually write that today until I learned about Demeioun Robinson late last night. But all signs point to Penn State here. They should be able to keep the Philly kid or the Philly prospect in state.
Lions is an on three 4-star prospect rather, and a 3-star in the on 3 consensus rankings. A guy who, of course, could see his stock climb in the days, weeks, and months ahead. And for Penn State, as it continues to try and find impact defensive linemen, it'll continue to pursue Lions in that way. And to your point, he set the August 4th commitment date, and that's a long way from now, and there'll be plenty of chances to take visits and things like that, in between. And you just never know. I mean, I think it goes without
Mm-hmm.
saying that recruiting can turn on a dime, but there's been many a prospect who has set a commitment date for the summer, and especially like late summer, such as August, and then
Mm-hmm.
made a choice much sooner than that. So we'll see how that plays out. But it
Yeah, I
wouldn't
could
shock
definitely see
me
that
if,
changing.
yeah,
Sorry
right.
to cut you off there. I could
Yep.
definitely see that changing. I mean, he's going to take at least 4 official visits in June. And, is he going to wait all of July to announce on his mom's birthday? I mean, obviously, there's significance there. He wants to do something special for his mom. Awesome. I think everybody respects that. But of course, you don't want to miss out on your spot either. And as we saw last July, and I think as we're going to see here moving forward with these June official visits and how important that is, July is becoming commitment month. So terrible for our vacations, great for the site, and great for a lot of these players. So I just keep an eye on that potentially changing. I know he doesn't want to, but if Penn State starts getting some defensive linemen, obviously he's very high on their board. So it's hard for me to see them totally recruiting over him. He's such a great athlete, man. Ran like a 4.6, I think, at Penn State at 240 some pounds. I mean, really, really special player. So that makes me think that he can take his time with it. But again, if they have a hot streak in July like they had last year, he might get his hand forced.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. We've also seen the, particular date commitment set for whatever reason, relative's birthday or something along those lines, a prospect's birthday, and then we get the old silent commitment before the actual announcement. So you never
That's
know.
true.
It's recruiting. That's what makes it fun from week to week, month to month, and year to year. But yeah, certainly Lyons is a player Penn State fans should be keeping an eye on. You can find out much more about him if you visit his On3 profile, on3.com, hit up the player rankings and the database search. And of course, you can read Ryan's story later this week with an in-depth interview with him at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Let's move on now to another player who actually has his top group out. I think I mixed those two up, but Amir
Yeah.
Herring, the guy that Penn State fans are certainly familiar with, a Michigan offensive lineman who Penn State has had its eye on for quite some time. He whittled his list of schools to 8 from, I don't have that number in front of me, but quite a sizable list of offers.
Yeah.
He's around the 8. And Penn State did make the cut there. So as they continue to try and grow this offensive line class, here's another guy to keep a close eye on, another interior offensive lineman as well. Don't throw your phone or your laptop. They are going to continue to recruit tackles, I promise, and they're going to look in the portal for tackles. But this is an interior offensive lineman by the looks of it at this point in time that they're pursuing, and they're in his top 8 schools.
Yeah. Yeah. It's Boston College, Cincinnati, Michigan, Michigan State, Missouri, Nebraska, and Pitt, and of course Penn State.
Quite the interesting
Man,
list of schools, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, to me, man, this is Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State. I mean, that when you just look at the visits, I mean, this is why we have that visit tracker at On3, and this is why we're going to push very hard at tracking every single visit we can, because when you do it right and you're able to get at least 90% of them on there and tracked, and fans can see, it really just lays it all out for you. And Michigan, Michigan State, and Penn State have been by far the schools he's been to the most. Cincinnati has come in there with 2 visits now. He did just go there in April, but to me, that those are the schools to beat. And I mean, I still would probably have to lean towards the Michigan schools, just because Penn State has 4 offensive linemen committed. Now, don't get me wrong, I still think they would take Amir, right? I mean, they're not hosting him 3 times in, what has it been, 5-6 months, if they weren't still extremely interested. And I think Amir as a person, as a player, there's so much that fit Penn State, but really he fits Michigan great too. I mean, I know Penn State fans don't want to hear it, but those programs do have a lot of similarities and just the kind of person that they go after. And same with Michigan State as well. So I'd still probably have to lean towards those 2 in-state schools. Really wouldn't surprise me either one of them. I know a couple of my colleagues think it's Michigan, and that wouldn't shock me at all. But Penn State's going to get him for official visit. I feel pretty confident in that. He hasn't come out and said that yet, but like I said, I mean, I feel like those 2 and Penn State, I would say 1A, 1B for Michigan State. Penn State probably sitting in that 2 spot, so they should get an official, and things will get sorted out after that. But he's definitely one of those guys who, again, it's all going to come to a head in July, and so many players are going to be trying to lock in their spots. It's going to be a wild month, no doubt.
It certainly is. Well, let's wrap things up with a mailbag question. We don't have a mailbag, but if you ever want to submit mailbag questions to us, you can do so. Our Twitter handles are at the bottom. If you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening wherever you get your podcasts, you can find us on Twitter, on the BWI Facebook page, or at bluewhiteillustrated.com inside the Lions Den Premium Forum. But Ryan, let me just, because you brought it up a few times now, and I do think that as we get close to the blue-white game, obviously that always ushers us into May and the contact period, and then the visit season starts in June. So you do think that the crazy July we saw last year is not going to be a one-off just because of visits being back last year and all of that? You think that's going to be a trend moving forward?
I mean, just about everybody I talk to is saying, take my official visits, commit before my senior season. Well,
Right.
your senior season, yeah, you may start playing games in late August, but it really starts at the end of July. Anybody, even up here in Pennsylvania, which, is usually a little later than some of the southern schools as far as getting going. I mean, you're really starting to shift your focus there the last week of July. Maybe if you don't officially start camp until the first week of August, but that's really the cutoff. So, I can see the Lash Bash, which is always kind of the last weekend in July being a big weekend, of course, but the whole time leading up to that. I mean, Mason Robinson, he makes sense for a guy that's going to commit then. I talked to Paul Mubanga, who's a Buford, Georgia resident, who was just up here a couple of weeks ago. He's planning on that. I mean, I'm just going through some of the lists of recent visitors here. I mean, Jamil Lyons, of course, I just hit on. Connor Liu was another Georgia guy who's thinking about doing that. I mean, I can just go down the list on how many guys who are planning to do that this year. And, of course, some things will change. Some of these guys are going to take a visit maybe for a spring game here in a couple of weeks and decide. And, others will just commit, during an awesome official visit. But I just think that's a trend, man. And
Yeah.
last year it was crazy for Penn State because of how many commitments Penn State had, right? But really, when you look at the whole month, I mean, so many schools were getting at least a handful of guys. They weren't getting 14 or whatever it was for Penn State. But you're going to see. I'd be surprised if you see like my over under right now would probably be like 5.5, and that may even be on the light side. So talk to me in June. We'll set odds, right, Greg? We'll set odds in June for that one. But
Never.
it's the new month, man. It's
Right.
used to be vacation month, right? And it is still for the coaches, of course. But for like me, for example, like it's going to be a crazy busy month. So don't plan on going to Ocean City, Greg. You got to work in July, buddy.
I will be ready to do just that, and the coaches will be able to take those commitment phone calls from a beach or a lake or wherever they spend their July, and they will be
Mhm.
excited, as we know you will be, to read all of that on bluewhiteillustrated.com. Ryan, any final thoughts here as we wrap up this week's edition of the BWI Daily Recruiting Show? Remember, it's $1 for 1 year to sign up for Blue White Illustrated and on 3. If you visit us after listening on Tuesday, or if you're checking this out Wednesday or later in the week, you're going to be able to find Ryan's visitor list as prospects continue to come to campus. Buddy, there's
Mhm.
only about 10, 11 days until the blue white game. It's hard to believe that we're at that time of year, but we most certainly are here as we come down the stretch.
Yeah, that's going to become my next big focus is trying to figure out who will be on campus for that game. I will hit on a couple visitors here this past week. Mason Robinson was just up here. We're hoping to get a good interview with him, potentially maybe with T Frank. T Frank's working on that. If not, I'm sure I'll get him here soon. But we want to get Mason, get a recap on his visit coming up. Of course, Stokes was here. I just hit on Paul Mubanga. He's a guy I did a story on. Man, he's visited I think it's like 9 schools in the past month and a half or something like that. So he's all over the place. Another probably interior guy. He's 6'4", 275. Like I said, out of Buford, Georgia, which anyone who knows Georgia football, like Buford is an absolute powerhouse down there. So it's good to get him back up. The 2024 class actually just had a pretty stacked class up here last week with Rico Scott, the Bishop McDevitt player. Great to see Rico continuing to come to campus, man. I think that's his third visit now in the last couple
Yeah.
months. And he's going to be the real deal. He's number 182 right now in the consensus. Aaron Childs, Aaron's a player you got to know down in Under Armour, Greg. He was just up here this past weekend, and when I was speaking with sources Monday night, trying to learn about Demeioun Robinson and some other stuff that I posted on the board, one guy that two people I spoke with, man, they really, really raved about Aaron Childs, and I think you would agree, man. When we
Yeah.
saw him at Under Armour, like
He's a player.
everything ticks the box with him. He looks physically great. He was great with not the interviews are important, but just the way he carries himself and all that. Like you have to love it. And he's also one of those kind of like, he was great with us in person, but he's kind of like quiet, low key, not looking for drama. Like that's everything Penn State wants as far as a top prospect, man. No drama, guys. So good group of guys are here this past weekend. I just posted a story today on what Wednesday's visitor list is going to look like, which is probably the best midweek visit we've seen so far. A handful of prospects from Philadelphia. I'll leave them behind the paywall, but Cooper Cousins will be here. Anthony Donko's coming back up. Malik McNeil, excuse me, will be here. So Wednesday's looking like a really good day. We'll get some recaps after that. And this last upcoming weekend, man, one last big weekend coming up here for visits before the blue-white game, where of course we're expecting Tony Rojas to be the big name this upcoming week. Another guy who I think down the road will be a Nittany Lion.
All right. Well, this has been another edition of the BWI Daily Recruiting Show. Don't forget to hit the bell to subscribe, like the page, and leave us a review wherever you get your audio. But for Ryan Snyder and Thomas Frank Carr, I'm Greg Pickel. We'll catch you next week. This has been the BWI Daily Recruiting Show from Blue White Illustrated.